The crystal vase shattered against the hardwood floor inches from where I stood. Champagne and glass shards exploding across my navy dress. My daughter-in-law's hand was still extended from the throw, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling with theatrical precision as she turned to face the crowd of wedding guests gathered in my son's living room. "Everyone, please," she announced, her voice cracking with manufactured concern. I didn't want to make a scene, but Marilyn just tried to put dish soap in the punch bowl. This is the third incident this week. Hey there, beautiful souls. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I pressed my palm against the cool wall behind me, feeling the texture of the wallpaper beneath my fingertips as I steadied myself. My heart hammered against my ribcage, but I kept my face neutral, watching as 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me with varying degrees of pity and alarm. My son Trevor stood frozen near the fireplace, his champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the bay windows illuminated the conflict playing across his features. The slight furrow of his brow, the tightening around his mouth, the way his gaze darted between his new wife and me. I bent down slowly, ignoring the wet champagne seeping through the fabric at my knees as I began gathering the larger pieces of broken glass. The sharp edges caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the floor. My hands moved with deliberate steadiness, placing each shard carefully into my cupped palm. "Mom, stop," Trevor finally said, setting down his glass and moving toward me. "You'll cut yourself." His wife, Patricia, stepped forward, blocking his path with her body. She placed one hand on his chest, her diamond bracelet catching the light. The gesture appeared protective, concerned, but I noticed how her fingers dug into his shirt, holding him in place. "Honey, remember what the doctor said about enabling her episodes?" Patricia whispered, though her voice carried perfectly across the silent room. "We have to let her face the consequences of her actions." I stood slowly, feeling my knee joints protest after 54 years of use. The broken glass clinked in my palm as I walked past the crowd of guests. Trevor's colleagues from the law firm, Patricia's country club friends, a handful of distant relatives I barely recognized. Their whispers followed me like a wake, hushed and insistent. The kitchen door swung shut behind me, muffling the murmurs from the living room. I deposited the glass shards into the trash bin, watching them cascade down with a series of sharp clinks against the metal bottom. My hands trembled, not from age, not from confusion, but from pure rage that I forced down into my chest, where it burned like acid. The kitchen gleamed with pristine white marble countertops that Patricia had insisted on installing last month. Everything in my son's house bore her mark now. The clinical cleanliness, the expensive fixtures, the complete erasure of the warm, lived-in space it had been before their wedding 6 months ago. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning pale against my brown skin. The door opened. Trevor entered alone, his footsteps hesitant on the polished hardwood. I didn't turn around, instead focusing on the view through the window above the sink. My old garden, now replaced with decorative stones and imported grass that required weekly professional maintenance. "Mom?" His voice carried the weight of something rehearsed. "We need to talk about getting you some help." I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. He looked away first, his gaze dropping to study the floor tiles. The man who once told me I was the strongest person he knew couldn't even hold my stare for 3 seconds. "There's a facility that Patricia found," he continued, pulling out his phone and scrolling through something. It's actually really nice. They have activities, professional staff, people your age. People my age who are actually senile, I said, each word precise and controlled. Trevor's jaw tightened. He pocketed his phone and crossed his arms, a defensive posture I remembered from his teenage years. But back then, I'd been the authority. Now I watched him struggle with this new dynamic, where his wife's narrative had somehow become the official version of reality. You've been forgetting things, he said. Patricia told me about last Tuesday. You left the stove on for 3 hours. I moved past him to the refrigerator, pulling out the pitcher of water I'd made that morning. The lemon slices floated at the top, perfectly cut, fresh. I poured myself a glass with steady hands, not spilling a single drop. I was making tea, I said. The kettle has an automatic shut-off. Patricia turned the stove burner on herself after I left the kitchen, then called you at work in a panic. Trevor's expression flickered, doubt crossing his features like a shadow. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and I saw Patricia's name flash across the top. He didn't open the message, but his shoulders straightened, his resolve apparently reinforced by her digital presence. She's concerned about you, he said. We both are. The kitchen door swung open again. Patricia entered, her heels clicking with purpose against the floor. She'd changed from her champagne-soaked dress into a navy blue outfit that made her look like she was attending a business meeting. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, and her makeup had been refreshed. Not a trace of the earlier incident remained visible on her person. The guests are leaving, she announced, looking only at Trevor. Your mother's episode really put a damper on the celebration. I set my water glass down carefully on the counter. Patricia's eyes finally shifted to me, and I saw something flicker there. Something cold and calculating that disappeared behind a mask of concern so quickly I might have imagined it. Marilyn, I think it's best if you head home and rest, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You've had a difficult day. I don't need rest, I replied. Patricia moved closer to Trevor, slipping her arm through his. She tilted her head, looking up at him with wide eyes that glistened with manufactured tears. See? This is exactly what Dr. Morrison warned us about. The defensiveness, the denial. Her voice broke slightly. Trevor, I'm scared. What if she hurts herself next time, or someone else? My son's face crumbled. He pulled Patricia close, and I watched her smile into his shoulder. A small, triumphant curve of her lips that she thought I couldn't see. My hands gripped the granite counter edge until my knuckles ached. The cool stone beneath my palms was the only solid thing in a room that seemed to tilt sideways. Trevor's face, my son's face, so much like his father's, had transformed into something I barely recognized. The doubt in his eyes cut deeper than any knife. Patricia's fingers traced circles on Trevor's arm, a gesture that looked comforting, but felt predatory. She turned her face toward me, and those manufactured tears had already dried. Her makeup remained flawless. Not a single mascara streak marred her carefully constructed mask of concern. I should call Dr. Morrison now, she said, reaching for her phone with her free hand. He said to contact him immediately if there were any incidents. What incidents? The words scraped out of my throat. There was an accident. My purse strap caught on something. Patricia's thumb hovered over her phone screen. She glanced at Trevor, then back to me, her expression morphing into something resembling pity, the kind reserved for lost children or wounded animals. Your purse was on the floor, Marilyn, nowhere near the table. Her voice dropped to a gentle whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. You walked directly to my chair and dumped the champagne. Several people saw it. The kitchen walls pressed closer. I released the counter and moved toward the door, needing air, needing space, needing to escape this nightmare that Patricia had constructed around me. My feet carried me back through the dining area where two servers gathered broken glass into bins. They stopped working when I passed, their eyes tracking my movement with unconcealed curiosity. The living room had emptied. Chairs sat askew. Abandoned drinks left sweating rings on expensive coasters. Through the bay window, I watched the last guests cluster near their cars in the driveway. A woman in a red dress gestured animatedly, while two others leaned close, their heads bobbing in agreement. One of them pointed back toward the house. I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass. My reflection stared back, a ghost of myself superimposed over the scene outside. When had the wrinkles around my eyes deepened so much? When had the silver strands overtaken the black in my hair? I looked old. I looked exactly like someone who might be losing their grip on reality. Behind me, footsteps approached. Not Trevor's confident stride or Patricia's sharp click-clack. These steps shuffled, hesitant. I turned to find my sister-in-law Janet standing in the archway between the living room and hallway. Her gray cardigan hung loose over her frame, and she clutched her purse against her chest like a shield. "I'm heading out," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's getting late." "Janet." I stepped away from the window. "You were sitting right there. You saw what happened." Her gaze darted toward the kitchen, where Trevor and Patricia's voices murmured in low conversation. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, the purse strap twisting between her fingers. "I saw the champagne spill," she said carefully. "That's all I know for certain." "But you saw me trip." Janet's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her sensible brown shoes, at the hardwood floor, at anything except my face. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Patricia showed us those messages you sent her," Janet finally whispered. "The ones where you accused her of stealing from you? And then there were those late-night calls where you didn't remember calling the next morning." My stomach dropped. "What messages? What calls?" "Marilyn, please." Janet took a step backward. "Get some help. For Trevor's sake, if not your own." She turned and hurried toward the front door, her cardigan fluttering behind her. The door opened and closed, and I stood alone in the living room surrounded by the debris of a celebration that had imploded around me. My phone sat heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and opened my messages. The conversation with Patricia loaded, and I scrolled upward through the history. There, 3 messages sent at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. Messages I had no memory of writing. "You took my mother's ring. I know you did. Give it back, or I'll tell Trevor what you really are. You can't fool me. I see through your lies." The words swam before my eyes. My thumbs had typed those letters. My phone had sent them. But I remembered none of it. I kept scrolling, finding more messages scattered through the past month. Accusations, threats, ramblings about conspiracy and theft, all bearing my name, all sent from my number. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and hit the carpet with a muffled thud. I sank onto the couch, my knees refusing to support my weight any longer. The cushion exhaled beneath me, releasing the faint scent of the vanilla candles Patricia had chosen for the house. My house. The house where I'd raised Trevor, where I'd painted every wall myself after Marcus died, where I'd memorized the creak of every floorboard. The phone lay face up on the carpet, screen still glowing with those impossible messages. I pressed my palms against my thighs, feeling the fabric of my slacks bunch beneath my fingers. Real, solid, present. But those messages existed too, time-stamped and archived, digital proof of conversations my mind had erased. I forced myself to stand and walk to the hallway closet. My hands moved automatically, reaching for the shoebox on the top shelf where I kept important documents. Bank statements, insurance papers, the deed to the house. I pulled it down and carried it to the dining room table, pushing aside half-eaten cake and crumpled napkins. The latest bank statement crinkled as I unfolded it. My checking account showed regular withdrawals. Grocery store, gas station, utility payments. Nothing unusual. I traced my finger down the columns of numbers, searching for evidence of something wrong. Then I saw it. 3 cash withdrawals from an ATM across town. $200 each. All made on days I distinctly remembered being at my book club or running errands near home. The paper trembled in my grip. I set it down and reached for my purse, dumping the contents across the table. Wallet, keys, reading glasses, lipstick, loose receipts. I smoothed out each receipt, checking dates and locations. Walgreens on 5th Street. I'd never been to that location. A diner called Rosie's Kitchen. I didn't recognize the name. All dated within the last 6 weeks. Footsteps sounded on the front porch. Heavy, deliberate. Trevor's footsteps. The door opened without a knock, and he filled the doorway, his jaw set in that way that reminded me so much of his father. Patricia appeared behind him, her face pale but composed. "Mom?" Trevor's voice carried no warmth. "We need to talk." I gathered the scattered receipts, my fingers clumsy. "I was just looking through some things." Trevor crossed the room and placed a manila folder on the table. It landed with a slap that made me flinch. He opened it, revealing printed emails, more text message screenshots, and what looked like medical forms. "Dr. Chen called me yesterday," he said. "You missed your last 3 appointments, the ones we scheduled after you got lost driving home from the market." I stared at the papers, recognition sparking and dying. I wasn't lost. The construction on Madison Avenue confused me. "There's no construction on Madison Avenue?" Patricia spoke from near the doorway, maintaining her distance. "There hasn't been for 2 years." My mouth opened, but no words formed. Trevor pulled out a chair and sat down, his movements heavy with exhaustion. He rubbed his face with both hands before looking up at me. "I found your car parked at the community center last week," he said. "You'd called me, frantic, saying someone had stolen it from the grocery store. You were standing in the parking lot searching for it while it was 3 blocks away where you'd driven it for your yoga class?" The memory surfaced like something dredged from deep water, hazy, distorted. I remembered the panic, the certainty of theft. But the yoga class? Nothing. Patricia moved closer, pulling out her phone. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. A video played, showing me in this very kitchen, wearing my blue nightgown. The timestamp read 3:15 a.m. I watched myself open cupboards, pull out dishes, and set the table for dinner. My movements on screen were purposeful but mechanical, setting out 6 place settings with careful precision. "You did this 4 nights in a row," Trevor said quietly. "Patricia found you each time and led you back to bed. You never remembered in the morning." The video continued. I watched myself open the refrigerator and begin removing food, raw chicken, vegetables, condiments, arranging them on plates. My face in the video showed no awareness, no recognition of the absurdity. I looked like a stranger wearing my skin. "Turn it off." My voice came out hoarse. Patricia's thumb moved across the screen, The video stopped, freezing on an image of me holding a knife, cutting invisible food on an empty cutting board. The knife clattered from my hand and spun across the floor, coming to rest against the refrigerator. I backed away from Patricia's phone, from that frozen image of myself wielding the blade in the darkness. My hip struck the counter edge, sending a sharp jolt through my spine. Trevor reached for my arm, but I jerked away. His fingers had barely brushed my sleeve, yet I felt the weight of his intention. To steady me, to contain me, to manage me like a confused child. I moved toward the kitchen doorway, needing space, needing air that didn't taste of their pity and concern. The living room offered no sanctuary. Photographs lined the mantel, arranged in Patricia's meticulous style. I saw myself in each frame: birthday parties, graduations, holidays. My face smiled out from glossy surfaces, but now those images felt like evidence in a case being built against me. Documentation of a person who no longer fully existed. Footsteps followed me. I heard Trevor's heavy tread, Patricia's lighter steps. They maintained a distance, hovering like nurses monitoring a patient who might bolt or collapse. The sound of their breathing filled the silence, measured and cautious. I grabbed my purse from the sofa and rifled through it. My hands shook as I pulled out my wallet, my keys, a crumpled shopping list written in handwriting I didn't recognize as my own. The items listed made no sense. Batteries, birthday candles, orange juice, cat food. I hadn't owned a cat in 15 years, not since Smokey died. "Mom, what are you looking for?" Patricia's voice came from behind me, soft and careful. I didn't answer, couldn't answer. My fingers closed around a small notebook buried at the bottom of the purse. I pulled it out and flipped it open. Pages upon pages of my handwriting filled the book, but the entries were strange. Conversations I didn't remember having. Appointments with doctors whose names I'd never heard. Notes about medications I'd never been prescribed. The notebook slipped from my fingers and fell open on the coffee table. Patricia moved forward and picked it up, her eyes scanning the pages. Her expression shifted from concern to something harder, something that looked almost like vindication. "Where did you get this?" She held the notebook up, pages splayed. "It's mine. It was in my purse." "No." Patricia flipped to the front cover where a name was written in faded ink. "This belonged to Grandma Helen. These are her journal entries from when she was sick." The room tilted. I gripped the back of the sofa to keep myself upright. Grandma Helen, my mother, who died 23 years ago after 5 years of slowly losing herself to dementia. I'd cleaned out her things after the funeral, donated most of it, kept only a few precious items. I had no memory of taking this notebook. No memory of carrying it with me. Trevor moved to Patricia's side and read over her shoulder. His jaw tightened, muscles working beneath his skin. When he looked at me, something in his eyes had changed. The warmth had cooled, replaced by a clinical assessment that made me feel like a specimen under glass. "How long have you had this?" His question came out flat, stripped of emotion. I opened my mouth, but no words formed. My mind raced backward, searching for the moment I'd placed that notebook in my purse. Nothing surfaced, just blank space where memory should have been. Patricia set the notebook down and pulled out her phone again. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, typing something I couldn't see. She held the device to her ear and turned away, her voice dropping to a murmur. I caught fragments. Evaluation. Immediate. Safety concerns. My legs moved before conscious thought directed them. I stepped toward the front door, hand reaching for the knob. Trevor intercepted me, his body blocking my path without actually touching me. His presence alone formed a barrier I couldn't cross. "You can't leave right now." His words were gentle, but underneath ran a current of steel. "This is my house." My voice cracked on the last word. "Actually, it's not." Patricia ended her call and moved closer, her phone still gripped in her hand like a weapon. "Trevor and I took over the mortgage 6 months ago when you stopped making payments. You signed the paperwork. Don't you remember?" The room tilted sideways, walls sliding at an impossible angle before snapping back into place. I gripped the doorframe, fingernails digging into painted wood. My reflection stared back from the hallway mirror. A woman I recognized, but couldn't quite place. Gray hair pulled back from a face mapped with lines I didn't remember earning. Patricia's words echoed in my skull like stones rattling in a can. 6 months ago? Paperwork. My signature on documents I had no memory of seeing, let alone signing. "I need to sit down." The admission tasted like defeat, bitter on my tongue. Trevor guided me toward the couch, his hand on my elbow firm but careful. My body sank into cushions that should have been familiar but felt foreign, too soft, too low. The fabric beneath my palms had a texture I didn't recognize, rough woven material instead of the smooth leather I expected. Patricia remained standing, her phone pressed against her chest like armor. Her eyes tracked every movement I made, cataloging, assessing. A stranger's eyes looking at a stranger. My purse sat on the coffee table where Trevor had placed it. I reached for it, slow and deliberate, half expecting someone to stop me. No one moved. Inside, beneath the notebook they'd found, my wallet sat wedged against a prescription bottle I didn't recognize. I pulled it out, squinting at the label through vision that blurred at the edges. The name printed on the bottle was mine. Marilyn Campbell. The medication name meant nothing, a string of syllables that refused to stick in my mind. Prescribed by Dr. Helena Yoshida. I turned the bottle in my hands, watching orange plastic catch the afternoon light streaming through windows. The date showed 3 weeks ago. "You've been taking those every morning." Patricia's voice came from somewhere above me, detached and clinical. "You complained they made you dizzy, but Dr. Yoshida said the side effects would pass." I set the bottle down, my hands trembling now in a way I couldn't control. The shake traveled up my arms, settling in my chest where my heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat beaded along my hairline despite the cool air pumping through the vents. Trevor crouched in front of me, bringing his face level with mine. His features had changed since I'd last really looked at him. More lines around his eyes, gray threading through his temples. When had that happened? How much time had slipped past while I wasn't paying attention? "The doctor's on her way." He spoke slowly, enunciating each word like I might not understand otherwise. "She just wants to check on you. Make sure everything's okay." "I'm fine." But my voice sounded hollow, unconvincing even to my own ears. Patricia moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. Her posture stayed rigid, shoulders squared and back straight. A warrior's stance. She'd changed clothes since? Since when? This morning, she'd been wearing something blue, hadn't she? Or maybe that was yesterday, or last week. My mind felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, gaps where solid memory should have been. I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct the past few months. Trevor's wedding came back clearly. Patricia in her white dress, the ceremony in the botanical gardens, champagne toasts under string lights. That was 2 years ago. Or was it 3? A knock at the door sent my eyes flying open. Patricia moved to answer it, her movements quick and efficient. She opened the door before checking the peephole, which meant she'd been expecting this visitor. A woman entered, carrying a leather medical bag that looked well used. She wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray sweater, but her demeanor screamed medical professional. Sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency before settling on me. "Mrs. Campbell?" She crossed to where I sat, her steps measured and calm. "I'm Dr. Yoshida. We met last month at the clinic." I searched her face for any spark of recognition. Nothing. She was a complete stranger. The examination kit clicked open on my coffee table, metal instruments gleaming under the lamplight. "Doctor." Yoshida pulled out a small flashlight, her movements methodical and unhurried. I pressed my spine against the couch cushions, feeling the worn fabric bunch beneath my shoulders. "I need you to follow this light with your eyes." She held the pen light at arm's length. "Don't move your head." The beam swept left, then right. My eyeballs tracked the movement, feeling strained and dry. Behind the doctor, Patricia stood with arms crossed, watching every second of the examination like a prison guard monitoring an inmate. The comparison made my stomach turn. Dr. Yoshida set down the light and picked up what looked like a blood pressure cuff. She wrapped the fabric around my upper arm, the Velcro making a harsh ripping sound as she secured it. The cuff inflated, squeezing tighter and tighter until my fingers tingled. I watched the numbers on the digital display climb, then slowly descend. 140/95. The doctor's voice carried no emotion, just facts. "That's elevated from your last reading." "She's been under stress," Patricia offered from her position by the window. "All the confusion, the wandering, it takes a toll." My jaw clenched so hard my molars ached. I hadn't wandered anywhere. I'd left my own apartment to get groceries, to live my life. When had basic independence become classified as wandering? The doctor produced a tablet from her bag, fingers swiping across the screen. The blue light reflected off her glasses, hiding her eyes. She tapped something, scrolled, tapped again. Each movement felt like another nail being hammered into a coffin I didn't know I was building. The cognitive assessment from 3 weeks ago showed some gaps in short-term recall. Dr. Yoshida turned the tablet toward me, displaying a series of numbers and graphs that meant nothing. "But these things can fluctuate." "Can they fluctuate back?" The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and desperate. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag again and pulled out a laminated card covered in simple line drawings. A house, a tree, an apple, a clock, a cat. "I'm going to show you these images for 30 seconds. Then I'll put the card away and I want you to tell me what you saw." My hands gripped my knees, nails digging into the fabric of my slacks. This was a test for children, for people with severe dementia. The humiliation burned in my chest, hot and acidic. But I focused on the card, committing each image to memory with fierce determination. House, tree, apple, clock, cat. The doctor flipped the card face down on the table. She checked her watch, letting silence fill the room. 30 seconds stretched into an eternity. Patricia shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the floorboard creaking beneath her heel. "All right, what did you see?" "A house." The word came out steady. "A tree, an apple, a clock, and a cat." Dr. Yoshida made a note on her tablet. No smile, no acknowledgement of success. Just another data point in whatever case file she was building. She produced more cards, some with words, some with patterns, some with sequences of colors. Each test felt designed to expose weakness, to find the cracks in my mind and pry them open. My head throbbed by the time she finished. The pain started behind my left eye and radiated outward, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I wanted water, aspirin, and for everyone to leave my apartment so I could think without being observed and measured. I'd like to schedule a full neurological workup at the hospital. Dr. Yoshida closed her tablet case with a definitive snap. MRI, blood work, the complete panel. No. The word came out louder than I'd intended, echoing off the walls. Patricia moved away from the window, her expression hardening. Mom, this is necessary. I said no. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly from sitting too long. The room tilted for a second, then righted itself. I don't need an MRI. I don't need blood work. I need people to stop treating me like I'm already gone. The doctor gathered her instruments, placing them back in her bag with practiced efficiency. She didn't argue or insist, which somehow felt worse than if she had. Her silence suggested she'd already made up her mind about my condition, about my future. Think about it, she said, slinging the bag over her shoulder. In the meantime, I'm prescribing something to help with the anxiety. And the blood pressure medication needs adjusting. She handed Patricia a prescription slip, not me. The gesture was small but devastating, a transfer of authority that confirmed who was really in charge now. My daughter-in-law folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket without looking at it. After Dr. Yoshida left, Patricia remained standing in my living room. She picked up a framed photo from the bookshelf. Trevor and his older sister, both kids in the picture, gap-toothed and sunburned from some long-ago beach vacation. My son. My children. When had Patricia started acting like she had more claim to my family than I did? I know you're angry. She set the photo down, adjusting it so it faced perfectly forward. But everything I'm doing is because I care about you. The words should have sounded kind. Instead, they landed like stones. Story block 8 to 10. The doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession. Urgent, insistent. I moved toward it, but Patricia was already there, her hand on the knob before I could cross half the distance. She opened the door to reveal Trevor standing on the porch, his work shirt wrinkled and sweat-stained, his face flushed in the late afternoon heat. Behind him stood 2 more people. A woman in navy slacks and a crisp white blouse carrying a leather folder. A man in khakis with graying temples, his expression professionally neutral. They had the look of people who'd delivered bad news before, who knew how to arrange their features into sympathetic masks. My stomach dropped. The prescription paper. The doctor's visit. This wasn't coincidence. What's happening? The words came out steadier than I felt. Trevor stepped inside without invitation, and the others followed. The woman extended her hand toward me, then seemed to think better of it and lowered it to her side. Mrs. Campbell, I'm Sandra Brennan from Adult Protective Services. This is Eric Holbrook, a social worker assigned to your case. My case, as if I were already filed away, categorized, processed. I backed up until my spine hit the wall beside the bookshelf. Trevor moved into the living room, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Patricia stood near the door, her arms crossed, her expression carefully blank. But I could see the triumph she was trying to hide in the set of her jaw. Sandra opened her folder, pulled out several sheets of paper covered in dense text. We've received multiple reports of concerning behavior, confusion, disorientation, potential self-neglect. We're here to conduct a wellness assessment. Reports from who? My voice came out sharper now, cutting through the careful professional tone. From her? I pointed at Patricia. She didn't flinch. The source of the reports isn't... It was from me too, Mom. Trevor finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "You left the stove on twice last week. You couldn't remember our conversation about Thanksgiving. You keep forgetting to take your medications." The stove? I'd been warming soup. Got distracted by a phone call about jury duty. Could have happened to anyone. The Thanksgiving conversation? He'd called while I was in the middle of watching my programs. And yes, maybe I'd been only half listening, but that wasn't dementia. The medications were in their bottles right there on the kitchen counter where they'd always been. But standing there with 3 people staring at me, their faces arranged in practiced concern, I couldn't marshal my defenses. The words stuck in my throat. Eric moved deeper into the living room, his gaze sweeping across the space with clinical precision. He noted the stack of mail on the side table, unopened bills I'd been meaning to sort through, the dirty coffee cup I'd left on the bookshelf yesterday, the throw blanket bunched on the sofa where I'd napped that morning. "How are you managing daily tasks?" Sandra's pen was poised over a form. "Cooking, cleaning, personal hygiene?" "I manage fine." "When's the last time you bathed?" The question landed like a slap. I felt my face burn with humiliation. This morning? Or was it yesterday? Time had been slippery lately, the days bleeding together since Patricia's announcement at the church. Since the whispers started, since my friends stopped calling, since the world decided I was disappearing before I'd actually gone anywhere. "I don't have to answer that." Eric picked up a pill bottle from the end table, examined the label. "These are dated from 6 weeks ago, should be empty by now." "I don't always need them." "The prescription says daily." He set the bottle down with deliberate care, like evidence being catalogued. Trevor moved closer, his hands now clasped in front of him as if in prayer. "Mom, please, just let them help. Let them see that everything's okay, and then they'll leave." But I could read the room now, could see how this would play out. They'd ask their questions, check their boxes, write their reports. And whatever I said, however I defended myself, would be filtered through Patricia's narrative. The narrative that said I was failing, fading, no longer capable of making my own decisions. Sandra stepped forward, her voice softening into that practiced sympathy. "We're not here to upset you. We just need to ensure you're safe." Safe. The word they all used when they meant controlled. I pushed off from the wall, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Get out." "Mom, all of you, this is my house, my home, and you don't have the right to walk in here and—" "Actually, we do." Sandra held up a paper from her folder. "We have authorization to conduct this assessment. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can pursue a court order." The room seemed to contract, the walls pressing closer. Patricia remained by the door, blocking the exit. Trevor stood between me and the kitchen. Sandra and Eric had positioned themselves to cut off any route deeper into the house. I was surrounded in my own living room, trapped by people who claimed to be helping. My breath came faster now, shallow and quick. The edges of my vision started to blur. "You're upset." Eric's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Let's all take a breath and—" I lunged toward the door, not thinking, just moving. My shoulder caught Patricia's arm as I shoved past her, my hand scrabbling for the doorknob. She grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Mom, stop!" Trevor's hands were on my shoulders, pulling me back. I twisted in his grip, my elbow connecting with something soft. He grunted, but didn't let go. Sandra was saying something about calming down, about making this harder than it needed to be. Eric moved in from the side, his arms outstretched as if to corral a spooked animal. I kicked out, my foot hitting the coffee table. The impact sent a vase crashing to the floor. water and wilted flowers spreading across the hardwood. The sound was enormous in the small space. Glass shattering, water splashing. My own ragged breathing loud in my ears. My hands were shaking as Trevor guided me backward toward the couch. The broken glass crunched under his shoes. Water from the vase soaked into the carpet, creating a dark stain that spread slowly outward like blood. Patricia was rubbing her arm where I'd hit her, red marks already visible on her pale skin. "This is exactly what we're talking about." Sandra's pen moved rapidly across her notepad, documenting every detail. Violent outbursts, inability to cope with routine situations. I wanted to scream that this wasn't routine, that being ambushed in my own home wasn't normal. But my throat felt too tight, the words trapped somewhere between my chest and my mouth. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out everything else. Eric crouched down, beginning to pick up the larger pieces of glass. He moved carefully, methodically, as if he'd dealt with situations like this 1,000 times before. Probably had. I watched his hands work, watched him deposit the shards into his palm one by one. Blood welled up from a small cut on his thumb, but he didn't stop. "Let's try this differently." Sandra sat down in the armchair across from me, her posture relaxed despite what had just happened. "I'm going to ask you some questions, simple ones. You answer them, and we can all move forward." Trevor still had his hand on my shoulder, a weight that felt less like comfort and more like a restraint. I could see Patricia through the corner of my eye, still standing by the door, still blocking my exit. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. "What year is it?" The question hung in the air between us. I knew the answer. Of course I knew the answer. But giving it to her felt like surrender, like admitting she had the right to test me this way. 2024. Sandra made a note. "Who is the current president?" My hands curled into fists against my thighs. Each question felt like a small violation, peeling away another layer of my dignity. I answered mechanically, my voice flat and distant even to my own ears. The president's name, my birth date, the address of this house where I'd lived for 30 years. "Count backward from 100 by sevens." I started. 93, 86, 79. The numbers came easily, automatically. I'd always been good with math, had balanced household accounts for decades without ever missing a payment or making an error. But Sandra's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away about whether I was passing or failing whatever test this was supposed to be. Eric had finished with the glass and was now mopping up the water with paper towels from the kitchen. The wet sounds of his work filled the spaces between Sandra's questions. Trevor's grip on my shoulder loosened slightly, though he didn't remove his hand entirely. "Can you repeat these 3 words? Apple, table, penny." I repeated them. She asked more questions. What I'd eaten for breakfast, what season it was, who had been president before the current one. Each answer felt like a small piece of myself being catalogued, filed away, used as evidence against me. "Now, what were those 3 words I asked you to remember?" "Apple, table, penny." Sandra wrote something lengthy in her notes, her handwriting too small for me to read from where I sat. Patricia had moved closer, standing just behind Sandra's chair now. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her expression a mixture of concern and vindication. "I'm going to give you a scenario." Sandra leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "You're at the grocery store, and you realize you left your wallet at home. What do you do?" The question seemed absurd given everything else that had happened. I stared at her, trying to understand what kind of trap this was supposed to be. "I'd go home and get it," or use my phone to pay if the store takes that. More notes, more documentation. I could see my life being reduced to check marks and observations, my competence measured in how well I could answer elementary school questions. Trevor finally removed his hand from my shoulder. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, his shoulders rigid with tension. Outside, I could see my neighbor's car pulling into their driveway. Normal life continuing while mine fell apart. Last question for now. Sandra clicked her pen closed and tucked it into her folder. Why do you think we're here today? The answer rose up in my throat, bitter and hard. Because Patricia lied. Because my son believed her over me. Because the system was designed to strip away the rights of people my age at the first sign of anything that didn't fit neatly into their categories of normal behavior. Because my daughter-in-law thinks I'm losing my mind. Sandra stood up, smoothing down her skirt. Eric gathered the wet paper towels and carried them toward the kitchen. The assessment was over, but I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of whatever came next. We'll be submitting our report to the court within 7 days. Sandra handed me a business card. You'll receive notification of the hearing date by mail. 6 months later, the morning sun cuts through the cafe window, warming the back of my neck as I arrange the poetry books on the community shelf. My fingers trace the spine of Maya Angelou's collected works before sliding it between Langston Hughes and a worn copy of Rumi. The cafe owner, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair, nods approvingly from behind the espresso machine. Your reading group really brought life to Tuesday nights, she says, frothing milk with practiced ease. I smile and continue organizing. The shelves need attention before the group arrives this evening. 12 regular members now, up from the 3 who showed up that first nervous week after the court dismissed Patricia's petition. The memory of the judge's face when Dr. Hannah Chen testified about my cognitive assessment results still brings satisfaction. Her crisp voice explaining that my test scores placed me in the superior range for verbal reasoning and memory. The cafe door chimes. I glance up to see Marcus entering, my son's shoulders no longer carrying the weight they did when he first appeared on my doorstep 3 months ago. He'd stood there in the rain, his suitcase at his feet, divorce papers in his hand. I'm sorry, was all he'd managed before breaking down. Now he sets a box of pastries on the counter and joins me at the bookshelf. We work in silence, our movements synchronized from weeks of these Tuesday morning preparations. He pulls out the folding chairs from the storage closet while I arrange the cushions on the window seat. The routine feels solid, real, built on actions rather than assumptions. Patricia's lawyer called yesterday, he says quietly, unfolding chair number 7. She's contesting the custody arrangement again. My hands pause on a cushion, then continue fluffing. The divorce isn't final yet, won't be for another 6 months given the complications of their separation. Their daughter stays with Marcus during the week, sees her mother on weekends under supervised visitation after Patricia's own psychological evaluation revealed concerning patterns. How are you handling it? He sets up chair number 8, then 9. Better than I would have before therapy. The espresso machine hisses and gurgles. A construction crew works across the street, their hammering providing percussion to the morning. Life moves forward with its noise and complications, refusing to stay still or simple. I move to the small stage area where I'll read tonight. The microphone stands ready, its black cord coiled neatly at the base. 6 months ago, the thought of speaking publicly would have sent panic through my chest, the fear of being watched and judged overwhelming. Now I test the sound level, my voice steady as I count to 3. The purple-haired owner brings me a latte, the foam decorated with a delicate leaf pattern. Your friend called. Said she's bringing 4 new people tonight. My friend? The term still feels fresh. Valerie and I met at a support group for people who'd survived guardianship attempts. She'd lost 2 years of her life to a system that declared her incompetent after a minor stroke. We'd bonded over bad coffee and bitter laughter, then started making plans. The advocacy organization we founded operates out of a small office 2 blocks from here. 3 days a week, I train volunteers on recognizing signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The irony isn't lost on me. Being falsely accused of incompetence gave me expertise in protecting others from the same fate. Marcus finishes with the chairs and comes to stand beside me. We look out the window together at the street below. A woman pushes a stroller past the construction site. A man walks 3 small dogs that tangle their leashes around his legs. The mundane beauty of ordinary existence. I should have believed you, he says, not for the first time. I don't answer. Some things need to be said repeatedly, absorbed slowly like water into dry ground. His recognition of the wrong doesn't erase it, but it creates space for something new to grow. My phone buzzes. A text from Dr. Chen confirming our lunch appointment tomorrow. She's writing a paper on how ageism intersects with mental health assessments, wants to interview me for the research. My story becoming data, evidence, proof that the system needs changing. I type a quick confirmation and slip the phone back into my pocket. The cafe fills with the scent of fresh bread as the owner pulls a tray from the oven. Golden crusts glisten under the kitchen lights. My stomach rumbles, reminding me I skipped breakfast in my hurry to get here early. Want to grab lunch after we finish setting up? Marcus asks. Can't. Meeting with the city council representative at noon about the senior advocacy bill. He nods, pride visible in the softening of his expression. The bill would require mandatory legal representation before any guardianship proceeding, a safeguard that might have saved me months of stress if it had existed before. We work for another hour, fine-tuning the space. I adjust the lighting, test the microphone again, arrange the sign-up sheet for new members. Everything in its place, ready for the evening's gathering. At 11, I lock up and walk the 6 blocks to City Hall. The security guard waves me through without checking my bag anymore. I've become a regular fixture in these marble corridors, meeting with officials and lawyers, pushing for policy changes. The representative's office smells of old books and fresh coffee. She greets me with a firm handshake, gestures to the chair across from her massive desk. We spend 90 minutes reviewing the bill's language, debating amendments, strategizing about votes. My mind stays sharp, engaged, tracking the complex web of political considerations. When I finally leave the building, the afternoon sun sits high and bright. I breathe deeply, feeling the expansion of my lungs, the strength in my legs as I walk. Alive, present, competent, free. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.